All right, we are privileged to have a special guest in class today in Brian Cohen, and Ulysses, beloved TA Ulysses is going to do the introduction.
Hi guys, I could not be more excited to introduce Brian Cohen. After almost 2 decades doing marketing in the music industry, Brian, along with a friend, started Beam Camp in 2005. Inspired by his quote unquote idyllic camp experience as a kid, Beam Camp was created as a place for teens to learn to build and collaborate on a large scale project. As Beam Camp grew, the need for this type of education in our school systems became more clear. So Brian co-founded Beam Center, which is based out of New York. Beam Center's mission is to power youth development and hands-on learning with creation, collaboration, and education and professional development. Brian currently serves as its executive director. Personally, I'd like to think that my experiences with Brian and Beam led me to TA this class, as I'm sure you'll see. We can't wait to share some of that magic here today. Please give it up for Brian.
Wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. I was saying before that I'm not used to being like a big face on a screen like this, but I am glad I can see your faces, sort of. And I encourage you to be unruly and ask questions, interrupt, etc. I have to admit that I'm much more comfortable being in a dining hall full of people, with the smell of fried chicken nuggets and other things wafting in the air, more so than I am, talking sort of one way into a laptop, despite the fact that I've been doing it almost constantly for the last 2 years. So thank you, Yuli. Thanks, Robert, for inviting me. I wish I had been in the last few sessions of your class, so I understood exactly where you are in your conversations. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of tell you the story. I'm going to share my screen. I'm not really good at like presentations and stuff, but I'm going to sort of flit through the presentation, and maybe I'll go back and forth from sharing to unsharing. I'm going to play some videos, etc. You'll have to tell me if my sound is working. So as Yuli said, I work for the Beam Center. We're a nonprofit. We're based in Brooklyn, New York, Red Hook to be exact. Anyone from Brooklyn, New York in the room? Anybody from New York City in the room? Raise your hands. No? Anybody go to summer camp, sleepaway camp in the room? Okay, good. Oh, I should say this before I start. Whenever I talk to people of your age, the first thing I have to say is we hire a lot of young people every summer at Beam Camp. And if you're interested in what I have to say today, I encourage you to get the link to the counselor application from your TA, Yuli. All right. So Beam Centers in Brooklyn, we make things with young people. We collaborate with young people, educators, and artists to build ambitious collaborative projects. I'm going to show you our video that we share at the beginning of any work that we do with teachers or students or anyone. Let's see if it works, shall we?
At Beam Center, we make things. We call the things we make projects, and they are a tangible expression of our learning, intended for sharing broadly beyond Beam. This learning can be expressed as spectacular installations, interactive technology, personal artwork, functional products, crazy machines, or a mix of all of them. Our approach to making is collaborative. It is an exchange of skills and ideas as beautifully varied as our identities and experiences. In making, we rehearse for the limitless challenges that face us in an unpredictable world. And each moment of every project is a reminder that with communication, community, curiosity, and considerate work, anything is possible.
I'm hoping that you guys weren't just sitting in silence in the room for the last minute and a half. You could hear that? Thumbs up?
Good. Yeah.
Okay, good, good. Too much politeness sometimes doesn't work. Anyway, so that's what we do. We make stuff, and we do it in a whole bunch of different contexts. I'll probably spend most of the time today talking about camp because, as Yuli said, it's probably the most purest form of our practice. But this is just a quick snapshot of what we are evolving into. We started 17 years ago in the forest of New Hampshire with the camp. And once we came to New York to sort of figure out how collaborative project making works within a more explicitly educational context and in a city, we've been growing in a lot. So as you can see, in 2019, we work with 7,000 young people. We work with 300 teachers in that year. We run a large youth employment and apprenticeship program. We employ a bunch of people and are seem to be hiring endlessly. We work with a lot of schools. And when I say schools, I specifically mean New York City public schools. We tend not to work with charters or private schools. That is primarily because we want to have long-term relationships, and we find that public schools are the ones that are most interested in that. We have 3 locations here in Red Hook, which is where I'm sitting in this very glamorous fulfillment-like environment, which I can talk a little bit more about in a second. In New Hampshire at our sleepaway camp, our original location. And most recently, we've established a facility on Governor's Island, which is a 170-acre island at the south end of the island of Manhattan, which has a long history of various kinds, primarily Native American and military. And we now are running programming there in and outdoors for public school students. So the story that I'm telling you today is the story of the power of making together. You know, all these words on these slides are words that we use to describe, we learn to describe what it is that we do or we think we do. But the fact of the matter is, when we started, we really had only one thing in mind, and that was to get out into the forest and make things with young people. So I'm going to digress and tell you why we got there. And I don't know how relevant this is to your actual studies, but maybe it gives you a better idea of what my motivations have been and how I came to this kind of experience for the people who are building these things. So I loved jazz as a young person. From the time I was 9 or 10 years old, my obsession was jazz music. And I just loved it. I loved playing it. I loved listening to it. I loved reading about it. I loved reading about the politics around it, the sociological stories around the people who played jazz. I loved reading about Black people. and what they did, how they lived, and how they expressed themselves. When I was 12 years old, I was reading the New York Times Magazine, and at the back, in those days, they had ads for sleepaway camps. I had never really wanted to go to a sleepaway camp up until that point, but then I saw a little ad that said the word jazz in it, among other things. And I decided that that was the summer camp that I wanted to go to, and it was called Lighthouse Camp. And I went to learn how to play saxophone better and learn how to play jazz with other people. And it was joyous. But what I really found there was an environment where adults were not treating me like a student. In fact, many of the adults there, I got the impression, didn't really like young people or kids. What they did like is playing music and dancing and doing theater and building sculptures. And there were these little people that they were obligated to share their practice with. And that is what I got from camp. I got the feeling and warmth from adults who were passionate about a discipline, and they wanted to share their passion with anyone around who was interested in collaborating with them. I decided before my third summer ended, when I was 14 years old, that I would one day create an environment like that. At the time, I thought, well, you know what, I'm just going to imitate, I'm going to just recreate this camp for other people someday. Of course, after graduating college, I didn't have the money in the bank to live that dream. So instead, I went to work in the music business. And I worked as Yuli said, as at record companies for about 20 years. But as soon as I could, I realized that I wanted to realize my second dream, which was to start a camp. And my friend Danny and I talked a lot about what kind of camp we wanted to start. And I read books. I tried to discover sort of a philosophy that would lead me to my dream. And luckily, the first book that I decided to read was a book called How to Change the World by David Borenstein. And it was really the first time that I had read about a design process. I had been in sort of the creative area in my youth and my career in the record business, but I had never really thought about what it was to design a solution for the world. And in that book, I read about Florence Nightingale and how she convinced the English Parliament to let nurses go to the front in World War I by having colored presentation materials and all this stuff. And I realized that, and the book showed me that you have to design a solution for other people, not for yourself. And I realized that my dream of recreating my camp bliss, my experience at my camp, Lighthouse, was narcissistic and not the way to do something that made a difference in the world. And so Danny and I did a lot of thinking about where we thought we could be helpful for young people in the far future. And this was around 2002, 2003. And we looked around and we said, what will young people in the middle or end of the 21st century need? And we came up with two things. One was to understand what lies behind the perfection of the interfaces by which they do most of their interaction, meaning what lies behind those click and choose interfaces that all of you probably have been engaging with since you were infants. The second thing we thought could be useful was how to collaborate in real time together authentically, not frictionlessly, but with a lot of friction, because real collaboration can be, how should I say, not elegant. And the third thing we thought was important was how to make things with your hands. I think we thought that because we were nostalgic, and also we thought because making things with your hands, our instinct was at least, was that that would teach confidence, capability, and resourcefulness. So we tried to design a solution. And the solution we came up with was, what if we went out into the world and asked big thinkers to propose an idea that our camp could help them bring to life? And that was it. That was the idea. Big projects, learning the skills to build them, figuring out how to collaborate to make them a reality. So we brought, in 2005, we brought 27 little kids and some of their parents and some of the experts that we could find who were interested in making very little money to build a big thing up to New Hampshire, and we started experimenting. So I'm going to play you a video of a project that we did a few years after that. That is sort of emblematic of what a big project looks like at Beam Camp. Oh boy, let's see, does this work? Yes.
I'm Shiggyun Kaur. I'm from Los Angeles, and I am the project master for Beam Camp's 20th project, Salvage Station number 8. Salvage Station number 8 is an immersive and interactive art installation that looks like a decrepit salvage station that's been hit by an asteroid in the outer colonies of space. To draw kids into the world of the Salvage Station, we encourage them to build their own characters that would exist in this galaxy.
Hello. Greetings, Salvage Station.
Hey, this is Fishboy. This is Salvage Station 8.
Why weren't you at the wedding? Your friend was counting on you.
Hi, I'm Nomi as a gnome, and
And we've been sort of planting little hints and letters and slowly working this universe into everything that they're doing at camp.
the Salvage Station is exciting to me in particular because it involves so many different creative techniques. Woodworking is important. It really helps us create the structure of the building. And really, if you take away all the painting and distressing that we're doing to the project, it's essentially building the frame of a small house.
This project, it requires a lot of like old and kind of weird things and making like container props that have like brain guts or like weird body parts, like hands and feet and like weird things growing on top of the hands. And we use dark colors or like rusty looking colors like orange or like gray and black, putting a little dent into it and making it look kind of run down and broken, making it look like it's been there for a pretty long time.
Isaac, I think I figured it out.
This is the last day of the project, and it's a little crazy because there's not any more time to work on it. Doing electronics in the rain is incredibly crazy, and today we're working under a tent, and we have to be very careful not to get any of it wet. It adds to the crazy. It's certainly not making things easier.
Hey! That is exciting!
Yo guys, it's actually really cool when you turn them off and turn them back on. People are gonna be watching mine. Can I do it?
That's kind of creepy that it's moving.
The Salvage Station is amazing at night.
It's just like awesome, and I didn't think it would turn out this way at night.
There's no one part of it that I like. I like it all.
So there's so many dimensions that I could point out about that. Many of them make me cry because all of those little kids have grown up. Many of them have worked for us in varying ways, which is a very important aspect to what we do at Beam Center. Wow. Anyway, sorry about that. Uli can testify that I don't get through many public events without crying. Anyway, so that's a good example of the kinds of projects we do. And there are so many elements of that particular project that are especially emblematic of what we like to do. Xing, who was the designer of that project, was a uniquely wonderful project master because she has a number of universes, constellations of imaginary life that she is constantly working on, and and she does them in all many different media. She works in illustration, she works in sculpture, she's done many installations at Burning Man. And this space station was merely one manifestation of one bit of one of those universes. She is also a craftsperson who is both incredibly adept at the crafts that she practices, but also stunningly committed to detail. And the way that we collaborated with her, as we do with all of our project designers, is the ideas usually begin with a sketch. In Xing's case, of course, it was not only a sketch, but it was a 3D model of handmade, of course, that she showed to us and said, "This is what we're going to build." And sure enough, the finished product that you saw was near exactly what we ended up building. But so the process of developing the project with her, though, is breaking all of those details down into skills, stories, arcs of learning, and instruction. And so as an example, Xing would give us examples of the distressed, rusted faux painting, and our project team would think about how they would turn that into what we call a fundamental at camp, where the campers are not only learning how to do distressed painting for the purposes of the project, but also so that they might apply that skill to a project of their own making, so that they're using that skill both in the context of a massive collaboration and in the context of something they're doing for themselves that they would like to make. So that's sort of an overview of camp. I will run through some other project examples. This was a project called Swing Tones. It was designed by a landscape architect from New York City. The idea of this project was the swings were attached to chimes, and as you swung on the swings, the chimes, beautiful chimes, would ring in the forest. I believe there were 6 unique swings. And, you know, this is also a good example of the kinds of many disciplines that the campers and the staff are working on together. There's carpentry, metalwork. I think that big pink ball is fiberglassing, many different disciplines. Here is Daisy Daisy, which was designed by an English architecture firm called Wayward. It's a who doesn't love a water slide? In this case, this is a water slide whose water is brought to it through pedal pumps. So we ran a line from the lake that is not far from there, and people would go on the pedal pumps, and that would bring the water from the lake up to the top of the water slide so that it would lubricate the slide way. Now this is an example of a project that we do use year after year since 2015 when we built it. In contrast, the Salvage Station disappeared after its first summer because we did not design it for permanence. And that's an important point for us. We are agnostic as to whether these projects survive or not. Our number one priority is that we realize the vision of the designer. Our second priority is that the young people have an experience of walking around the brain of that designer to see how that big idea comes together. And the third priority is that it's an incredible finished product. Permanence is only important to us if it can be designed into during our development period. If we can think ahead enough, and if the project requires it, either for safety or because the budget will allow, and we can design that into the project, then we love to have them last for a longer time. This project is Universal Play Machine, otherwise known as the biggest flip books in the world. We built 5 of them at camp. As you can probably see, this was they're animation machines that are at night this beautiful mirrored object in the forest, and then there's solar panels that power a battery that when the timer, when it gets dark, the light turns on from the inside and you can see into the workings of the flip books themselves. Now, this is an important project for us, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, because it was the first project that we did 2 times. The second time we did it in New York City, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This was our Brawn and Bread project. This is a contraption that starts with wheat, grinds the wheat into flour, and then the flour can be made into bread or pizza and made into within the brick oven that was also part of the contraption. And I'm happy to say that brick oven works very well to this day. 2019, we made a Chromothermic Iceberg, meaning that the tiles that were made of molded plastic with chromothermic pigment baked into them would change color with temperature rise. This is an example of a project that came to us from 2 architects in Canada, and frankly, we were not very impressed by the proposal because they had proposed it merely as a sort of recreational feature for camp, and really we're less interested in infrastructure, building infrastructure, than we are building something that's more expressive and has multiple sort of ways to enjoy it. So we, as part of, even though we were actually not going to do this project, but we didn't have enough others to choose from. So we decided to commit to the collaboration with them and walk them through turning it into some more more of an immersive art piece. And through these sort of conversations and us giving them examples of other work, they came up with this chromothermic idea. The iceberg does persist, and we did use it last summer. The tiles, unfortunately, were not well fastened, shall I say. So there's a lot of tiles floating in the lake right now. And then finally, last year was a significant in many respects. Obviously, in 2020, we did not run camp. But we had already chosen this project for 2020. This is a Cobb Construction structure that is both a shelter and a very expressive music machine. You can see the device that's in the window there. There are channels for rain to come off the roof of or the top of the structure, and the campers created these sort of gravity based instruments and sound making devices, and the water collects, and then the instruments spin and either have chimes or some other sound making feature. So the other thing that's significant about this is that it's the first time we attempted to make a project out of entirely sustainable materials. I think we have, and this is part of our, sort of general learning process. Again, as I said earlier, when Danny and I started the camp, all we cared about was making an incredible project and having everybody have a catharsis and feel like they had been part of an important accomplishment that was bigger than themselves. Over time, and especially when we started engaging with schools in New York City, we realized that the learning in that process was a black box to us, and that as a matter of both survival and growth, we had to unpack that black box and understand what that learning was, and why it was useful, and why young people felt powerful as a result of the experience. Similarly, we started understanding that although making beautiful things is wonderful, if you are just making them and then throwing them out, you may have more to learn. So this was our attempt at honoring a project that theoretically could melt back into the ground. However, things happen, and you'll see that the smaller dome here, well, the original idea and the construction of the bigger dome is essentially woven branches that are coated with this Cobb material. Well, that Cobb material is very heavy. It's basically mud with straw, and the smaller dome collapsed a week before the project was supposed to be finished. And Danny and I happened to be at camp for that. So we had to very quickly disconnect with the smaller dome from the bigger dome, clear the area entirely, and the project team erected a steel armature that could serve instead of the branches, and we were still able to complete the project. So how am I doing on time? Robert, Uli, am I okay?
Sorry, you've got plenty of time. We could turn to questions whenever you're comfortable.
Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, I got a little ways to go. And again, I may not be able to see everybody. If anyone has a question at any time, you can just shout.
Feel free to put Uli on the spot if you wish.
Oh, yes. Before I go into my next transition, thanks for reminding me. I was curious to hear from Uli about his reflections on this process. What did what I just described sound like what you experienced?
Yeah, I think the process of selecting a project is cool, and I think something that we should talk about. So basically, and correct me if I misunderstand this, but they effectively open applications, and anybody, any designer, anybody can submit a proposal for a project, right? And then Beam Camp goes through these proposals and picks, it used to be 2, now 1 a year to do. And so, I think it's a cool way. He's talking about all the people from, whether it be Canada or the US or Europe, who come and design these projects. And so it makes every year different. I think the other thing that's worth highlighting is this, right? Like, there is so much more that's going on besides this project, right? You do work on the project for a decent amount of time, but there were a lot of other things that happen, whether it be working on your own personal projects. And I think one of the things that was cool to me is somebody who is in CS and is an engineer. It was like this mesh of art and engineering, of like, they had domain experts come in, and we learned how to like write code that would generate patterns that we would then like make into a quilt or like sew together. And this ability to take very seemingly disparate dispositions and fields and combine them together. I think we've heard a lot of people talk about play, and if this isn't like the purest form of play over the summer, then I don't really know what is. You see those kids acting out these roles, and it's like, that to me is just the purest form of being comfortable with yourself and coming up with these crazy ideas. And I think having a space to do that for a prolonged period of time can be really impactful on a lot of aspects of people's lives.
Thank you. That you just created a perfect transition for me, and it's beautiful for you to hear your very specific reminiscence about that quilt project, because Nancy, who was the domain guest that you are describing, is on our board and has been a part of the Beam Center community since almost the beginning, and she is an expert in how to integrate those kinds of the art and technology and making together. But the reason that was such a great segue is because I think we too thought and think that that play is important to learning. And I think play, experimentation, exploration, sort of iteration, making mistakes, all of those things that people talk about as being so critical, not only in early childhood, but more and more at the places where you get paid a lot of money to work, like Google or Johnson & Johnson, or you name it. Play, interdisciplinarity, figuring shit out, starting a process without knowing for sure where it's going to lead. This is the future of work. This is the present of work. This is how work works right now. But one of the things that we discovered as we started working in New York City with public schools, and I should add that first of all public schools are for, 80% or more people who are not wealthy. In fact, they're poor. There's a good number of them, 100,000 or so, that are homeless. There are many who are a large percentage that are multilingual learners, who they themselves or their families have recently moved to the United States. It's mainly people who don't have a lot of choices economically, and for whom the systems of mass education have not really been designed all that well. So we discovered that that was the environment that we were now working in. And what we also discovered is that this kind of learning and working, playful, open-ended, multi-disciplined, was generally denied to the kinds of people I just described, the kinds of people who go to public school, the kinds of people for whom education was not well designed, especially formal and conventional traditional education. So all of a sudden we realized, wow, we're not doing this. We're not just doing this because we want to make beautiful things and have people have a sense of accomplishment and confidence. We're doing this because the way many children in New York City are asked to learn is fucked up and was not made for them. And so we learned, along with the idea that perhaps we shouldn't just throw all of the materials in the dumpster at the end of the project, that we have a much wider, broader vision, mission that we are on. And that is either to bring all those students up to camp or to break down the walls that they are currently asked to learn in. So among the things that we have done in the city since we started Beam Center in 2012 is to take the idea of these big projects and move them into an urban environment in the form of public art. You know, in many ways, our camp projects are private art because no one ever goes into the woods, or at least no one that we really want to be in the woods to see them. Whereas New York City is the biggest stage in the world for art and public art. And for us, the idea of these beautiful, finished, collaborative projects, the process of making them is very similar to what happens at camp, and the learning that can come out of them is very similar. There's skills, there's collaboration, there's negotiation, there's everything, there's project management. But then it's the projects themselves in their just how they exist makes a statement. It says beautiful big things are not just things adults make. Beautiful big things can be made by young people, can be made by any young person who decides that that's what they want to do and is given the opportunity, the choice, the tools, the resources to pursue that choice. And so what you're looking at here is our second New York City Beam project. It was designed by the woman who's standing in the middle, Siobhan Nichols. It was designed through a very similar call for proposal process as we do for our camp projects. And what you're looking at is a project called Beacon. It is, well, I'm gonna show you a video and let her explain it because she can say it much better than I can.
It's also about illuminating our existence, right? So there's so many of us that have felt isolated and have felt unheard, unseen, forgotten, marginalized. And Lewis Latimer, at many times in his life, actually experienced those same things. And so this project to me is really about illuminating our existence, really trying to shed a light around someone's presence. When you approach, or if you're in proximity to the piece, it illuminates light, it emits light. It's just acknowledging that you're there. It's a kind of saying, in a way, symbolically, I see you, and us being able to learn the story of Lewis Latimer, all of us, Beam Center, the fellows, myself as the artist, and all those we come in contact with, we now feel charged to make sure that more people know about Latimer, so that it feels as though this is this journey that we're taking together to bring light and share light, preserve it, and pass it on.
Seeing as the beacon's all about like the light bulb, that light essentially represents just coming out of your shell and expressing yourself and opening yourself to more possibilities in your life.
Sort of like hope and happiness and just all those positive feelings combined.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I'm gonna make a quick U-turn, not U-turn, just a quick left turn, and just very briefly talk about, how this relates to the work that we do in schools. The work that we do in schools is very similar in terms of how we collaborate, except that instead of the artist being the one of the the primary contributors to the collaboration, there is the teacher and there is the student. The teacher brings their expertise for the subject area that they are looking to illuminate for their students. The students bring their own points of view and how they want to express that idea in a project. So we collaborate with schools very deeply. We teach teachers our practice. Some would describe it as project-based learning. For us, it is it's project-based learning situated in community. Very much like Yuli was saying, camp isn't just building a project. Camp is falling in love. Camp is hating to eat certain kinds of food. Camp is swimming. Camp is arguing. Camp is getting in trouble. Camp is taking risks. That's what education and growth is all about, especially for adolescents. So what we are trying to do is work with students and teachers and school administrators to open up the learning environment to include all those things. Not easy. Risk is not something that public school people are comfortable with. We do projects that are designed by our project designers as a way of creating on-ramps to this kind of project-based learning and teaching. There are projects that we then support teachers to design with our help and our expertise. And then there are the projects that students design. In this case, we were working with a transfer school for undercredited and overage students, and the only common space they had in their school was a big room, and it served both as a gym and a cafeteria. So they decided to combine those two functions into a smoothie maker bicycle. So that's a very quick overview of how we work with schools. During the pandemic, or the early stages of the pandemic, because we're still in it, we obviously were schools closed. We were not able to work directly with students or teachers. We also had no clear path to financial solvency. So we just decided to figure out a way to work with students in the way that we like to, but with them sitting at their house. So we invented a set of projects called Future Humans that are circuitry, physical computing, and prototyping in these projects, built into a narrative where they have invented a planet and that they are now having to build apparel to help them survive and thrive on that planet. So in the summer, the summer of 2020, we created kits, thousands of them, and we essentially just delivered them to apartments and houses all over, primarily upper Manhattan and the Bronx, and then created online spaces. I like to think of them as somewhere between Discord and Slack for young people to work through the projects, get some coaching from our instructors, some of our teen youth staff, and at the end of it, they were asked to make a dance GIF for a dance party, wearing all of their future gear. And between then and now, thousands of young people have all made fun of themselves by creating these GIFs. So finally, I'm going to end with what our future looks like and where it all adds up. So as I mentioned, we recently started doing programming from Governor's Island. There's the aerial photo. There's the Battery, Lower Manhattan, and this is Governor's Island. In fact, you see the red flag here. This is Beam Center. So like if I had a good throwing arm, I could probably throw a baseball from where I'm sitting right now to Governor's Island, where our staff has just said goodbye to a high school from the Bronx who visited today. And so where it comes together is that we have a dream to bring camp to the city. And we feel like Governor's Island is just as good a place as any to do it. So we started Beam Camp City last summer. We hosted hundreds of public school students in a day experience where we built a project here called Constellation. And in the very near future, what we'd like to do is to start turning it into a sleepover experience so that Beam Camp can actually be in New York City for all the young people who deserve it most. And I'm going to end it right there. How'd we do? All right.
All right.
You're silently clapping.
Questions from students? Don't be shy. Anybody? We can turn it over to TA, the questions you submitted on Canvas, if you'd rather. Anybody have a live question they want to ask now? Going once? Going twice? Can I toss it to Risako or Andre?
A student who asks if you think that the collaborative projects help bring different racial, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds closer together. Do you think it has a positive impact or kind of negligible impact?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at it. I mean, I think that we rationalized. I mean, listen, camp started as a self-sustaining. I wouldn't call it profit-oriented, but because we never made any money at it, but we tried to pay for camp by charging tuition to the people who could afford it, and then just having other kids come that couldn't afford it. And we currently maintain a 30 to 70, 40 to 60 mix. So we used to rationalize the good that camp was doing for the world by saying, oh, well, we have poor kids and not poor kids together, and that's great. And yeah, to some degree, that's important. But I think what's more important is that that a particular brand of learning is made available to all kids, because in conventional education provided for people who do not get to pay for their own education or are not affluent enough to stack after school classes and have someone to drive them around. That kind of education is generally very rigid, and failure is the enemy and exploration is the enemy. Whereas parents who can afford, go explore, do your thing, go to a liberal arts college. It doesn't matter what you study, whatever, it's cool. Poor kids in general don't get that luxury. And not only do they deserve it, but they need it in order to work at Google someday or whatever company that works in a fashion that is not just bean counting, but is imagination and adaptation and innovation. Sorry, I didn't answer the question. Next question.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking to us today. I have a question from Maeve asking, the intention of the beam sensor is to create educational equity, which is awesome. However, this is probably very difficult considering that all of these kids are from different schools with different possible shortcomings. How do you supplement different kids' educations in different ways? And how do you find out what needs to be done for each student?
Beautiful question. Thank you very much. It is difficult. I mean, on one hand, it's difficult. On the other hand, we're in New York City. Don't let anybody lie to you. There's plenty of money for public education in this city. The New York City DOE's budget annually, get ready, is $28 billion. $28 billion. That is like, there are countries whose budget is not $28 billion a year. So there is money to do the work. It's bureaucratic, it is painful, but it's possible. As to like how we know what the needs are, we actually keep it pretty simple. We don't care what the needs are. We welcome people into our culture. We have an open door. There are no prerequisites. There are no, you don't have to know something before you come to engage with us. As my partner Danny often says, the only thing you need to do is pick up a box. And because we go with that kind of orientation where there are no prerequisites, you don't even have to be interested in what we do. It is our culture's responsibility to create compelling opportunities to want to be involved and to allow young people to do the things that they feel good about doing. Perfect example for us in terms of working with multilingual learners, many of whom are recent arrivals. They often feel alienated from primarily English instruction, and also are constantly hearing often from their parents, why are you in school? We need to pay the rent, so you should get a job. So for a young person who's committed to their learning, even partially in that condition, they are looking for opportunities in the classroom to be able to say, I understand what that person is asking me to do. So if we are running a soldering project for some whatever it is, and that Ukrainian kid recognizes what their father does in the auto shop in the soldering and decides that they can do that, they can be good at that, they can be the authority of that in the classroom to help their other students. We have opened a door to learning for a young person who otherwise wouldn't feel like learning was all that relevant to them. So again, I haven't answered the question, but I think bottom line is when you welcome everybody, you can be less worried about what each of them needs. Whoa. It was a bad throw.
Hi. So in your camp, there's an environment of like trying
fun things just for the purpose of it being fun and interesting and not being worried about mistakes and all that. Do you think that that could be useful in the context of adulthood and bringing adults to your camp? Or do you think it's only useful for kids?
Well, that is the over my many years, I don't do it anymore, thank goodness, of selling camp to parents, that is the number one question I was asked. Oh, when are you going to do this for me? And I would say never. Of course it's useful. And I wouldn't say that you use the formulation about mistakes. We don't encourage mistakes because we have to get things done. And we have to finalize this beautiful project that this designer has entrusted to us. However, we can respond to mistakes in a particular way, and we can, in non-punitive and productive and supportive way. And of course, all people need that grace in their environment. And I will say, and this is something that I'm sure many of you are experiencing now, or people who who are now working, or many of you are probably working. But one of the things that's happened in the last 2 years is that everyone, youth, adults, have become hypersensitive to the fact that their environments of labor are unsatisfactory, and that they want to have their labor recognized, and they want the fact that they have a life outside of their labor recognized as well and acknowledged. And so for me, creating these environments where learning and working are supportive of each other is also very important for people who are in the working world to be able to know what they're getting out of their labor. If you are not growing in a job, if you are not being collaborated with or being disrespected in that collaboration, then you need to consider what changes you can make either in that environment or by leaving that environment. So I don't know if this is the direction your question was going into, but I believe that what we're doing is very important and ever more relevant for adults who work anywhere.
Thank you.
Nice. Nice. Cut off.
First of all, thank you so much for being here and speaking to us. I was just curious, like with the projects themselves, what has been like the most unexpected or out there project that you've done? Like what was the craziest thing that you guys have built? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, there is always an element of crazy, as Dove in that Salvage Station video said so well. There's always an element of crazy because even and we plan our projects very well. We know what's going to happen, what has to happen, but the crazy comes from uncontrollable conditions. Certainly at camp, rain and other climate events, et cetera, are crazy. And humans are crazy. They're really crazy, as you may have learned. And so I think there's always the element of unpredictable human interaction. If you're looking for a literal answer, because as you can tell, I don't like giving literal answers, I will say that we've gone to some extremes at camp. Like we did a kaleidoscope, a 30-foot kaleidoscope, and we had to bring, we had to pour a 16-ton concrete foundation to support the 30-foot kaleidoscope. And then we we made the kaleidoscope in like cake slices, sort of cake layers, and we needed to get a crane to lift the layers onto the central frame and lower them down like I can't remember what, but it was basically like a core, and then lower them down like a dumbbell on a bar. And that was pretty crazy. One wonders, why are we doing this? And there have been some other pretty hysterical things. Yeah, I used to be pretty uptight about it. I don't know whether Uli remembers me screaming, but I used to do a lot of it. Confirm or deny? Uli, screaming, me?
Confirmed.
Remember?
Yes, especially with that one. It was very stressful last few days of us like dropping. I'll pull up a picture. It was, I think it's still the US tallest kaleidoscope. It was pretty
I
impressive.
believe so. Yeah.
I mean, it's in the middle of a forest too, and you can like turn a crank, and then the stuff at the top moves, and it was gorgeous.
Yeah, it's still pretty in pretty good shape actually. Other
So
questions?
You can turn this,
Oh,
and
sorry.
you literally get in it. I'm showing them the picture.
Oh,
You
right,
get in
sorry,
it and
sorry.
look up, and this gear turns. And anyway, so we got some oohs and ahs in the audience.
Yeah. Any other questions? If you don't mind, if you'll indulge me, I want to just sort of before the next question, if there is one, I wanted to just close a loop that I opened that I never closed. The reason the jazz, my interest in jazz, is I only recently realized how it connected to what the practice that we do, and that is that it is an art form in which the individual and the collective are at tension and dependent upon one another for for the beauty that they create together. And it is also distinctively a non-Western dynamic. And it's also beautiful and incredible, and plays with time in ways that many art forms cannot. But I realized that like this collaborative, ambitious collaborative project making is just another way of playing jazz with the physical world, and creating opportunities for people to be expressive on their own terms while still being in harmony with a collective achieving a big goal. Loop closed.
We had a couple student questions about collaboration, which I think hits on what you just talked about. But do you ever, I mean, I'm sure you do, have issues between students about collaboration? How do you try to resolve those and foster a, inclusive environment that supports that?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly conflict and adolescence and collaboration do not necessarily fit together naturally. Having said that, the middle school developmental period and an environment of compelling collaboration seems to work very well. It's something that we discovered at camp, that for all the complaining people do about middle schoolers, and what we realized is that, well, maybe the reason that middle school sucks is the way middle school is designed. And we found that like compelling environments of collaboration can actually chill out a middle schooler, and especially when they are in the presence of people who are both younger and older than they are. So yes, conflict is natural, but I will say that we have very we have less conflict in our programs than in most programs, because we are substituting the bullshit of everyday life with a new kind of bullshit. And that is, you know, this big idea that we're all working on. And you know, adolescents, you know, tend to like create their own conflicts because of irrelevant stuff. And when they have something that they can have in common, in which they and in a way that where their input is being respected, they tend to be less conflict, tend to less conflict. I will say though that when it does happen, the structures of the kind of work that we do enable us to fix things in public far more rapidly than you would in a school. You know, the natural playbook for conflict is to isolate the people who are in conflict. Our feeling is that you do the opposite. You obviously have to care for people and tend to them on their own terms, especially if they're emotionally, you know, stressed out and need to calm down. But ultimately, problems do not get solved that way. Problems get solved together in the middle of the group. And that is how we do it at camp. That's how we do it in our programs here. Again, not sure if I answered the question.
To add on, I know this may come as a shock to you all, but I was not a perfect middle schooler. I was not immune to conflict. Treating people like adults is I mean, it's inherent to be like, you know, I was welding at 13, you know, they treat you like an adult. They can't not treat you like an adult when you're dealing with like interpersonal conflict, right? And so you know, just it felt like very validating when, you know, like I was, you know, like to be treated like an adult, you know, especially when you're, you know, rebellious or you're pushing back. It's like when you're treated like an adult, you know, they're going to call you on your bullshit for lack of a better word. And, you know, and I think it does allow for you to be an adult, right? And I think it's necessary for that setting. So, yes.
Uli, you're bringing joy to me. Uli like to stir shit up. And he's absolutely right. We only in the weakest moments would we ever punish or, you know, like talk down to, you did it the wrong thing. It's more like a labor negotiation. It's like, what do we need? What do you need in order for you to feel better about what just happened? And that is really the approach that we take. And thank you so much for saying it, Uli, because it worked.
It did. Thank you.
All right. Zoom, you know that Zoom cancels out all of your applause. It's this beautiful like compression thing where it's like, everybody make noise together. Pure silence. All right, so am I done? Should I sign off? Yes? Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Remember, we're looking for counselors. We're looking for counselors. Don't.
I sent them the link.
Okay, thank you. All right, bye.
Thank you, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.